Good morning and welcome to New Center Maine's Political Brew. This week we're joined by former Republican State Senator Phil Harriman and longtime Democratic activist Betsy Sweet. We welcome you both. These are strange times as we begin this new year. We witnessed one of the darkest days in this country's history this past week, a violent and deadly insurrection in Washington when a pro-Donald Trump rally turned to riot and the U.S. Capitol was breached. It happened as Congress got down to the business of certifying the Electoral College votes and confirming that Joe Biden will be the next president. Betsy, is this President Trump's true legacy now?
Absolutely. I think this is his legacy. It's been building for 4 years and before that. And I think that for all of this time, especially establishment Republicans have given him a pass. And every time he ups the ante or lowers the bar, whichever you want to say, they keep giving him a pass and saying, well, we're concerned, we're worried, but they don't actually do anything. And so this was the natural outcome, but it was the desired outcome. When the president stands on the mall and says, let's go to Congress, and then they're completely unprepared, either by force or by design, to watch people's house just storm in, treat it with such disrespect and such dishonor. I don't know how you recover from that kind of thing.
Phil, what's your take?
Well, not sure I qualify as an established Republican, but those who faithfully watch the Political Brew have heard me consistently criticize the president for his narcissism and his pompous attitude and his undiplomatic approach to things. And it culminated on what we saw the other day. I don't know of a more heartbreaking time in my life, perhaps compared to when I saw President Kennedy taken from us in Dallas. Have I seen a day in American politics where I've just been so shocked at the behavior of what has happened. And I think this is an opportunity for us all to recognize there's a big disconnect between the elite politicians and we the people, whether they're from Black Lives Matter, Antifa, MAGAs, what doesn't matter. We need to call upon our elected officials to find ways to get us to be more connected to our government, not more antagonistic.
Yeah, and I think that this is a pivot point. This is a moment where we have to decide, and political leaders have to decide, are we going to continue down this track that is going to end in disaster or is already end in disaster and get worse? Or are we going to pivot and get back to, as you said, Phil, I couldn't agree with you more, governing for the people?
Now, Phil, you've said an investigation is needed to show whether any of the GOP claims about fraud are true. Would it really clear the air, and would Trump supporters believe it if it showed, in fact, there was no fraud?
Well, frankly, at this point, I don't care about the partisan politics. I want we as Americans to know that our electoral system, the most sacred right that we have as citizens, is treated as sacred. And if that means we need to take a fresh look at how we register people to vote, what happens on election day, do you have to follow a chain of custody with mail-in ballots? Are the computer systems counting the votes? Those are the answers that I think Americans, not Republicans and Democrats, Americans want assurance that when they go vote, they're legally voting and they're being counted. And I think we should all be able to agree on that.
Betsy, should the new administration conduct some sort of investigation?
We have those answers. I mean, that is to me, that's disrespectful to all the secretaries of state around the country. Those secretaries of state, the people in our states take election security very seriously. There were 64 lawsuits brought by Trump, and every single one of them was deemed baseless. So we're saying all the secretaries of states and all those courts are somehow, covering something up. I just think, do we need to make some improvements? Do we need to see, make sure that everything's fine? Yes, but that's going to happen in a matter of course. I think it's a distraction, and I think it's a result of someone saying, if I said to you, Pat, hey, Susie's stealing stuff from the lunchroom, what do you think? And you're like, what? And then every time I saw it, I thought, something's missing. When your lunch goes missing, you're like, hey, I bet Susie did it. Not based on anything. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think we need to move beyond this and get to governing.
That gets to the question we saw this past week. Trump allies, including Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Vice President Pence, drawing a line against the wishes of President Trump and his efforts to try to overturn the election results. But is the damage already done by those who have sown doubt about the integrity of the electoral system, Betsy?
Yeah, it's too much, too little, too late. I thought Mitch McConnell's speech was awesome on the night right after the insurrection, but it was like, they have to own that they contribute to this. that they have contributed to this. And so I think now we have to do some serious changes. And I think that they are responsible for saying to people, stop with the nonsense. our election system are secure, and they have to build back up the trust in our electoral system.
Phil?
That just proves the point that this is still all about politics, and good for Lindsey Graham and Pence and McConnell for making sure that our constitutional process unfolded as it should. At least the past, so to speak, is secure. But going forward, I think we have to make a non-political effort to assure that how we run our elections going forward is beyond reproach. And today, whether you like it or not, politically speaking, there are people who doubt that our system is free and fair and beyond reproach. We need to fix that. It's the most important thing we do as citizens.
And another unusual event this past week, the 10 living former secretaries of defense, including Maine's own William Cohen, signed an op-ed warning the military to stay out of this election. Phil, do you think that did something to perhaps reassure people that our system still functions?
Well, I hope so, but the bigger part of that op-ed is that the 10 secretaries of defense recognize that part of our constitutional responsibility is we, the people, run the government, and to have the power of the military mixed in there is not a good combination, and I congratulate them for putting their pen to paper on that topic.
Betsy, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I was glad they did it, but I thought it was really scary that 10 secretaries of defense thought that that things were so dire that they had to weigh in and say, okay, military, you can't be part of any kind of coup or anything else that's going to be attempted here. I mean, that's scary that they even felt that they had to do it. I was glad they did it. But, to think that that's how deep and dark this had gotten is frightening.
Governor Mills is proposing a mostly flat budget with no tax increases. Now, the state is facing a projected $650 million revenue shortfall over the next 3 years. The state is expected to rely on federal funding, cost cutting, and improved revenue projections to meet the numbers. And they promise not to take any of the money from the $258 million rainy day fund. But Phil, given all the uncertainty about the state's financial health, is the administration on the right track?
Yeah, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Governor Mills. You and I on Political Brew have discussed early on back in April and May that the numbers were not going to balance, and she's going to have some tough choices to make. And she's decided to do that by reducing government expenditures. Hopefully the money from Washington comes in and the rebound of the economy all comes into play to keep the budget balanced, but I compliment her for not seeking to raise taxes to keep state government growing.
What do you think of the approach they're taking, Betsy?
Well, I understand it and I get it, but I also worry that, it's so odd, and Phil knows this from being on the Appropriations Committee, it's counter-cyclical. When we need the money the most and government investment the most is when we often don't have it. And that's where we are right now. We have people in our state who can't pay their rent, don't have food. We have people who, don't have housing, and it's worse because of the pandemic. And so hopefully this federal money is going to come in, but if not, we're not going to get through this. I agree with looking at efficiencies and cost cutting, but we have a tax cut that's sitting out there that was LePage's that is sending a lot of money to people who haven't been affected in this pandemic. And I think that's going to have to be on the table before we get to the end of this.
Do you think that could be a realistic approach, Phil? Is this legislature willing to eliminate a previous tax cut and raise taxes?
I think that's going to be a hard sell, particularly in the House of Representatives, where the numbers are so close that there isn't a 2/3 vote that the House could produce. The governor's going to have to work with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, and I just don't see the energy behind raising taxes on Maine citizens who, as Betsy has said, are already struggling. And I think to put that on the table is going to create a lot of acrimony in the legislature.
Well,
go ahead, Betsy.
I don't think it'll happen until we see how bad it gets. I mean, if we look at the numbers, the COVID numbers today, we look at what's happening with businesses. You walk down Main Street in my town in Hollowell, businesses are shuttering. If we don't get a ton of federal support, we're going to have to do something to protect the very people that we're talking about.
Now, Maine has done a lot to make voting easier, and there's a legislator, Representative Maureen Terry, who has submitted a bill which would allow online voting in Maine. The new Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, suggests the place to start with this is online voter registration. Phil, do you think either idea is going to have traction?
Well, this goes back to our conversation in the first segment of Political Brew this morning, Pat. In order for these things to be accepted, we, the people, have to believe they are accurate and that only one person and one vote is occurring. If there is a way to do that, that assures that the ballots are protected, I do think that is the opportunity for the future. But just to say we're going to make it easy doesn't mean that we've made it correct and fair to the American and Maine citizens who legally are eligible to vote.
Betsy?
Yeah, I mean, I think online registration is a no-brainer in terms of how we do this. So I think people can register to vote. And then I agree with Phil that we have to make sure that any online voting would actually be really secure and we would feel good about that. But I think it speaks to the thing that we experienced this year in the pandemic, which is voting should not be hard. Voting should not be a challenge. You shouldn't have to climb mountains. And, we should make this as easy and secure as possible. And if this is part of that, then we should look into it for sure.
This past week, Democrats won both of the U.S. Senate seats in Georgia in those runoff elections. That means when you factor in independents Angus King and Bernie Sanders, the Democrats have 50 votes, the Republicans have 50, and that means the Democrats will control the chamber because of Vice President-elect Kamala Harris taking over. Betsy, what's the impact, you think, for Maine's U.S. senators and for Joe Biden's agenda?
Well, I think it's huge. I think we're going to actually see things start to move, because we know that in this past session, the Senate has absolutely, Mitch McConnell has absolutely stopped 450 pieces of legislation. I think we'll start to see those juggernauts go away. I think that we have a chance to actually do some things that people have been clamoring for around affordable health care, around the environment. So I think it's an important thing. It's really important because all the committee chairs now will change. And I think for Maine, that means that for us, I think Angus King his stock will rise. And I think Susan Collins will become the leading minority leader. And that is going to dissipate some of her power.
What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think Betsy's assessment is absolutely right. They're going to try to make up for lost time, so to speak. They had to endure the Trump administration approach to appointing judges and the Supreme Court justice, and it's going to be a little bit of step aside, boys. We're in charge now, and the men and women of the U.S. Senate on the Democratic side will carry sway. But at some point, moderate Democrats and reasonable, so to speak, Republicans are once again going to rule the U.S. Senate because, as you pointed out, Pat, it's 51-50. You can't act alone on most things.
And so that seems to bode well for both, as Betsy said, for Angus King and Susan Collins and their influence.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the winners and losers in politics in the past week. Phil, you're up.
Well, the loser of the week is obvious. The administration that created the environment that we saw unfold in Washington is the loser, but we're all losers. Our democracy lost last weekend. It's our responsibility as individual citizens to better understand how our government works and participate. The winner of the week, in my view, is Representative Jared Golden. He went down to Washington, pledged to his constituents that he was not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi to remain as Speaker. That's the way he voted. He represented his district. He's my winner of the week. And Betsy, your choices.
So to me, the losers, I agree with you. I think democracy is the loser, but I also think the losers are all of the Republicans who have been not liking what Trump has done, but have been complicit in not calling him to task. And I think that unfortunately got us to where we were this week. The winners to me are all the people and the organizers in Georgia, the hundreds and thousands of volunteers who haven't just been working since November or up to November, but have been working for decades to ensure that people in Georgia actually got their vote heard and counted. And those are, to me, those are the winners.
All right, Betsy, Phil, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. That's Political Brew for this week. We'll see you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.